The night my granddaughter stopped sleeping was the night she learned that doors do not always protect us from what happens behind them. She was 7 years old, small for her age, with a careful way of moving through the house as if she were afraid of disturbing the air itself. That evening had been ordinary in every visible sense. We had eaten dinner together, the four of us, and afterward she had insisted on helping me rinse the plates. I remember her humming softly, her chin barely reaching the edge of the sink. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the sound of her footsteps in the hallway. They were hesitant and uneven. At first, I thought she was walking in her sleep. I opened my bedroom door and saw her standing at the far end of the corridor, frozen, her small hand still resting on the frame of her parents' half-open door. The light inside their room was dim. I could not see much from where I stood. What I saw clearly was her face. Her expression was not the confusion of a child woken from a dream. It was a stillness I had never seen in her before, a quiet alertness that did not belong to someone so young. She turned toward me slowly. Our eyes met, and in that instant I felt a cold certainty that she had witnessed something she did not understand but would never forget. She did not cry. She did not call out. She simply walked toward me and pressed her face into my nightgown. I guided her back to her room and lay beside her until her breathing steadied. She kept her eyes open the entire time, staring at the ceiling as if replaying a private scene. I wanted to ask what she had seen, but something in her silence warned me not to disturb it. By morning, the house looked exactly as it always had. Sunlight filled the kitchen. Coffee brewed. Voices were polite and measured. Yet when she entered the room, she moved differently, as if carrying a fragile object inside her chest. She avoided looking at her parents. She sat close to me, her fingers wrapped tightly around mine. No one else seemed to notice, or perhaps they chose not to. It is difficult to explain how a single glance can alter the weight of a home. But from that night forward, the air between our walls thickened. Conversations grew careful. Doors closed more often. And though no one spoke of what had happened, I felt with growing clarity that my granddaughter had crossed an invisible threshold. Nothing in our family was ever the same after that night. We were, by all outward measures, a respectable family. My son and his wife lived in a modest but comfortable house on a quiet street where neighbors greeted one another with practiced warmth. He worked long hours as an accountant. She taught at a local school. Their lives followed a rhythm that appeared steady and dependable. I had moved in with them after my husband died. Age had narrowed my world, and their home offered both companionship and purpose. My granddaughter became the center of my days. She was a thoughtful child, inclined toward observation rather than noise. While other children demanded attention, she seemed content to watch and absorb. There was a sensitivity in her that I recognized from my own youth. She noticed the small shifts in tone that adults believed invisible. When voices tightened at the dinner table, her shoulders would stiffen. When laughter came too quickly, she would study the speaker with quiet suspicion. Beneath the surface of our orderly life ran currents that were rarely acknowledged. My son carried a restlessness he tried to disguise with routine. His wife possessed a composure that bordered on distance. They were courteous to one another, even affectionate in public moments, but there were silences between them that felt deliberate. I sensed unspoken disagreements lingering like shadows in the corners of rooms. They were never explosive. Instead, they manifested in subtle omissions. A conversation cut short when I entered, a door closed a little too firmly, a smile that did not reach the eyes. Our family had learned to function around these absences. We filled them with schedules, shared meals, and polite conversation. To an outsider, we might have seemed harmonious, yet I often felt we were preserving a delicate balance, one that depended on certain truths remaining unnamed. My granddaughter, with her quiet vigilance, moved through this landscape with an awareness that unsettled me. She clung to rituals, our evening walks, the stories I read to her before bed. In those moments, her body relaxed, and she allowed herself to be a child again. Looking back, I realized that she had already begun to understand that families are built not only on what is spoken, but on what is carefully avoided. In the weeks before the incident, our days unfolded with reassuring predictability. Mornings began with the sound of the kettle and the soft shuffle of feet on the stairs. I prepared breakfast while my granddaughter sat at the table, tracing patterns in the condensation on her glass. Her parents moved through their routines with practiced efficiency. He read the news on his phone. She packed lunches with precise movements. Their exchanges were courteous and brief, centered on logistics rather than feeling. After they left for work and school, the house settled into a gentle quiet. My granddaughter and I shared long afternoons filled with small activities. We tended the garden, folded laundry, and read together in the living room. She asked thoughtful questions about the past, about my childhood and the people I had loved. There were moments when the fragile harmony of our household faltered. A misplaced bill would spark a tense discussion. A late return from work would be met with restrained irritation. These conflicts were never loud, but they left behind a residue of unease that even a child could sense. I remember one evening when voices drifted from the kitchen after they thought she was asleep. The words were indistinct, but the tone was sharp. When they emerged, their faces were composed, yet my granddaughter appeared in the hallway moments later, her eyes wide and searching. She looked from one parent to the other, as if measuring the distance between them. Still, life continued. We celebrated small occasions. We shared meals and laughter. The fractures remained hidden beneath the surface, and we convinced ourselves that this was simply the nature of family life. It is easy to mistake familiarity for stability. We believed our routines protected us. We did not yet understand how quickly a single moment could expose the weakness beneath them. The truth of that night did not reveal itself all at once. It came to me later in fragments, assembled from her hesitant words and my own reluctant understanding. She had woken thirsty and left her room in search of water. The hallway was dark except for the thin line of light spilling from her parents' bedroom. As she approached, she heard voices, low and urgent. Curiosity, innocent and unguarded, drew her closer. Through the narrow opening of the door, she saw her father standing rigidly near the dresser. Her mother sat on the edge of the bed, her face pale. In his hand was a small envelope, its contents scattered across the surface beside him. Even at her age, my granddaughter recognized the tension in their bodies. Her mother reached for the papers. He pulled them away. The movement was sharp, controlled, but filled with a restrained anger that frightened the child watching. Words followed, accusations whispered with a force that carried more weight than shouting. My granddaughter did not understand the specifics of what was being said. She grasped only the emotion, betrayal, disbelief, and a kind of sorrow that seemed to hollow the room. When her mother's voice broke, the sound pierced the silence of the hallway. It was then that my granddaughter shifted her weight and the floorboard beneath her creaked. Both adults turned toward the door. For a brief second, their eyes met hers. She saw the shock on their faces, the sudden awareness that their private conflict had been witnessed. Fear rooted her in place. She felt exposed, as if she had committed an unforgivable intrusion. Without waiting for a word, she stepped back and retreated down the corridor, her heart pounding. That was when I found her standing there, suspended between childhood innocence and a knowledge she was not ready to carry. In the days after, my granddaughter changed in ways that were impossible to ignore. She became quieter, her movements careful and deliberate. She watched her parents with a guarded expression, as if searching for confirmation of what she had seen. At night, she resisted sleep. I often found her sitting upright in bed, listening to the faint sounds of the house. When I asked what troubled her, she shook her head and pressed closer to me. Her silence was not defiance, it was protection. Her parents, too, seemed altered. They moved around each other with exaggerated politeness. Conversations were clipped and formal. The warmth that had once existed between them retreated behind a wall of civility. I sensed that they were both aware of their daughter's watchfulness. They softened their voices in her presence, offered smiles that felt rehearsed. Yet children possess an instinct for authenticity. She responded to their efforts with a distance that pained me to witness. One afternoon, I found her drawing at the kitchen table. The image on the paper was simple, 3 figures standing apart, separated by wide spaces. When she noticed me looking, she covered the drawing with her hand. Something inside me tightened. I realized that whatever she had seen had begun to reshape her understanding of our family. The illusion of unity we had maintained was unraveling in her mind. I wanted to intervene, to bridge the growing gap, but I was bound by a hesitation I could not fully explain. I feared that asking direct questions might force her to articulate a truth her parents were desperate to contain. So we lived within that silence, each of us aware of it, none of us willing to break it. The moment she finally spoke came on a rainy afternoon when the house was wrapped in a gray stillness. Her parents were at work. She and I sat by the window, watching the water trace slow paths down the glass. Without looking at me, she said, "They were fighting about papers." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled in her lap. I waited, allowing the space for her to continue. She described the scene in careful detail: the envelope, the scattered documents, the look on her mother's face. As she spoke, her confusion surfaced. She did not understand why her father had hidden the papers or why her mother had cried. I felt the weight of her trust settle on me. I recognized the documents she described. Weeks earlier, I had overheard fragments of a conversation about financial decisions my son had made without consulting his wife. The papers were evidence of debts he had concealed, risks he had taken in secret. To a child, the specifics were irrelevant. What mattered was the rupture she had witnessed, the realization that her parents were capable of deceiving one another. I chose my words with care. I told her that adults sometimes make mistakes and struggle to admit them. I assured her that the conflict she had seen was not her burden to carry. She listened, her eyes searching mine for certainty. "Will they stop loving each other?" she asked. The question pierced me. I could not offer a simple answer. I told her that love can survive difficult truths, but it is changed by them. She absorbed this quietly, nodding as if accepting a difficult lesson. When her parents returned home that evening, she regarded them with a new composure. She did not mention our conversation, yet I sensed that something fundamental had shifted. She had named the secret aloud, and in doing so, she had stepped into a more complicated understanding of the people she loved. The revelation did not explode our family. There were no dramatic confrontations or sudden departures. Instead, the consequences unfolded slowly, altering the texture of our relationships. My son and his wife sought counseling. Their discussions became more transparent, though often tinged with exhaustion. Trust, once fractured, proved difficult to restore. They functioned as partners in the practical sense, but a quiet distance settled between them. My granddaughter observed these changes with a maturity beyond her years. She no longer assumed that harmony was permanent. She approached her parents with affection tempered by caution, as if aware that their stability required careful maintenance. I noticed a subtle shift in her relationship with me as well. She treated me as a confidant, sharing thoughts she withheld from others. Our bond deepened, forged by the secret we had acknowledged together. The house itself felt different. The easy laughter that once filled it became rarer. In its place emerged a sober honesty. Conversations were more deliberate. Emotions, when expressed, carried a gravity that reflected our collective awareness of fragility. We continued to live our lives, celebrating birthdays, marking milestones, but the innocence that had once defined our family was gone. In its absence grew a cautious respect for truth and its capacity to reshape us. Years have passed since that night, and my granddaughter is now a woman with a life of her own. Our family endured. My son and his wife remained together, their relationship tempered by the knowledge of what they had survived. When I think back to the moment she stood in the hallway, her eyes wide with understanding, I see it as the point at which our illusions dissolved. We had believed that by containing our conflicts, we were protecting her. Instead, we underestimated her ability to perceive what lay beneath our silence. That single glimpse behind a half-open door forced us to confront truths we had long avoided. It stripped away the comfort of pretense and replaced it with a more difficult, but more honest, form of connection. My granddaughter once told me that witnessing her parents' vulnerability taught her that love is not the absence of fracture, but the willingness to face it. I carry those words with me. Families are delicate structures, built as much from secrets as from shared memories. When a hidden truth surfaces, it does not always destroy what it touches. Sometimes it reveals the shape of what was already fragile. I am an old woman now, and I understand that we cannot shield those we love from every unsettling reality. We can only hope that when they encounter it, they find the strength to look without turning away. That night, my granddaughter looked through a door and saw the imperfect hearts of the people who raised her. In doing so, she altered the course of our family, not through accusation or anger, but through the quiet insistence of truth. And once seen, such truth never returns to the shadows.